This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast that underestimated a certain orange and blue equestrian team. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Let's talk about some college equestrian. Well, we're going to get right into it. We had a lot of action this week, so let's take a look at our meet recaps. Our first meet to look at is Baylor at TCU. Obviously, I go with the home team when the two teams are close in ability. I thought TCU was going to win this one by about 5 points. Let's see what really happened. In fences, that started off the day. That went 3-2 for TCU. Reining went 4-1 for TCU. So in the first half, the Frogs had a commanding lead. Now, in the second half, in the flat, Baylor won that one 3-2. So they pulled back fairly close, but then in horsemanship, TCU won that 3-2. So TCU ends up winning by a final score of 12-8. This was a good win for them. They continue to look strong over fences, and their two Western squads made sure that the outcome was never in doubt. For Baylor, despite this loss, this was still a good start for the season for them. No one expected for them to go into Fort Worth and just get the win. So they won the flat event, and that kept the meet within a couple of points. And on the road, that's about as good as you could expect, especially going up against a team as talented as TCU. So good job, Bears. The next meet to look at, Texas A&M at Delaware State. Now, I didn't think the Aggies were going to have too much trouble. I thought they'd have a pretty convincing win. They could possibly even experiment with their lineup a little bit and, start some girls who don't have as much experience and still kind of cruise. Let's see how things went. The flat went 4-1 for Texas A&M. Reining went 3-1 for them. Then in the second half, fences went 4-1, and horsemanship also went 4-1. So big day for the Aggies. Nice road win. They didn't take any chances as far as experimenting with the lineup. They really just put the hammer down, start to finish. Now the competition is going to get a lot tougher for Texas A&M going forward, but any road victory that you get these days, that's something you should celebrate. For Delaware State, there have been years when the Hornets could have possibly gotten one of these big home upsets over a larger program like this. It probably wasn't going to happen this time, though. But this meet will help them continue to improve as they get fully into their conference play now. Now let's jump over to a single discipline meet. We had Sweetbriar at Swanee. Now, I didn't hold out a lot of hope for Swanee. I thought that the Vixens were going to pretty much win this one start to finish. It didn't turn out exactly like that. Fences got the day going, and Swanee took this one 3-2. So right out of the gate, the Tigers were in the lead. But then the flat happened, and Sweetbriar won that one 4-0. So that pretty much ended the meet right there. A 6-3 win for Sweetbriar. Now, this was a really good win for Sweetbriar. Swanee is a dangerous team, and the Vixens did well not to panic when they went down early, and they just dominated the flat, and that won the day for them. For Swanee, this loss is a little disappointing, but they did push one of the top teams in the nation all the way to the end. Also, they had a nice live stream. I checked in on a little bit. It was a good way to keep up on things, so good job there too, Tigers. Speaking of Tigers, let's look at Auburn at South Carolina. Now, I like the home teams whenever the teams are close. So I thought Carolina would win by a point or two. Let's see what really happened. Fences went 4-1 for Auburn, and horsemanship went 5-0 for Auburn. So the halftime lead was 9-1 for Auburn, and they were fully in control. I tell you, I don't think a team has ever lost a meet when they've been out 9-1 at the half. So the day was essentially over. Auburn only needed 2 more points to clinch the victory, and then the flat came up. Auburn won that one 3-1. So right there, they had won the day. And then in Reining, now South Carolina did come back a little bit. They won Reining 3-2. So they made a good showing of it there. But yeah, no, this was pretty much all Auburn start to finish. It's really hard to do this against a good opponent on the road, so this is a great road win for Auburn. The Tigers proved they're legit with this win. For South Carolina, this is not how they wanted their SEC slate to start, but they did have 2 MOPs in fences and reining, and they were won by some freshmen. I think Amira Katana and, I don't know how I'm pronouncing that. It's probably not Katana. It's probably like Kittenu, something like that. And Olivia Carty. I got that one right, probably. So that is the silver lining for the Gamecocks that, they're developing that young talent. Now let's look at the second Swanee meet of the weekend, Lynchburg at Swanee. Now, I thought that the Hornets were basically going to do the same thing to Swanee that I projected Sweetbriar to do, and let's see what happened. Fences was a 2-2 tie, so right there it's all knotted up. You're like, okay, a big showing in the second half by Lynchburg, and they got this one. Well, it didn't go that way. Swanee won the flat 3-2, so they barely got the overall win. Big win for them, huge. They were on the verge of starting 0-3. And basically having no chance or almost no chance to get back to Ocala this season if they had lost this. But, there's still a lot of riding, so you never know. But, man, I tell you, to get this win over a big-name program on their resume, even though it was at home, that's still good, and that's definitely going to help Swanee come April. For Lynchburg, dadgum, I just did not think they were going to lose this meet. I don't think they're going to lose. I didn't think they would lose any meets going into this season. They had so much more talent than everybody else, but they really look mortal. I even went back and looked at their lineups and thinking, you know what, maybe they had a whole bunch of riders that were off competing in some other type of stuff this weekend, but no, most of the names on their lineups, those are the big names that you've been hearing for years that have been turning in points, but they're not turning in nearly as many points as they used to. So very strange. Not sure what's going on over at Lynchburg. Okay, now let's look at Fresno State at UC Davis. This was the last meet of the weekend. This one, man, I tell you what, it takes a long time for meets to happen out in California. And not just the time shift, but like a meet that would normally be about 3 hours at most other places, it takes over 4 hours if UC Davis is hosting it or if Fresno State's hosting it. It's weird. And they've got 2 different rings, so I don't know what's going on over there. But maybe some of y'all's folks could maybe do a video chat with some people out further east, and figure out what they do to do things faster, because it is noticeably slower for y'all. But anyway, back to the meet. Okay, so let's see here. So this is the battle for the woke agenda. Fresno State at UC Davis. I thought that the Aggies were going to win this one, probably be close, but I thought the home team would win. Let's see how things went. Like I said, they didn't post a lot on this either on social media, so it was very hard to keep up with who was winning. They did have a live stream, which was very nice, but it didn't have a lot of information you could read and say, oh, this is what the current score is. You had to kind of look at the scoreboard as the camera panned across the ring. So anyway, and also that nobody had a link to live stats or anything, or the pre-meet lineups or anything like that. So the social media team at Davis needs to get a little bit better. Anyway, I knew at one point it was like 9-6 Fresno State at one point, with one event to go. From that, I was able to deduce that the last event was raining, and that must have gone 3-2 for Fresno State. Because of our final score, it ended up being 12-8 for Fresno State. Fresno State won the meet. That's what I'm trying to get at here. And then there were some combination of things that happened other than raining that got us to 9-6. And then once raining happened, they went the full way to 12-8. Not a lot of data on this one. Again, the social media team over there at Davis needs to kind of step up their game a little bit. Anyway, this was a big win for Fresno State. I talked about when they went on the road and they got those 2 wins, how we could already tell that this was a different year for them. They're doing a lot better. And then this really shows that. To go on the road and get a win, any road win that folks get is a reason to celebrate. But UC Davis is a legit team, y'all. They're like the 2-time ECAC champions. So to beat them at home like this, and not just by a point or two, to beat them by several points, that's worth celebrating. So Fresno State, good job. I hope y'all are celebrating, because you earned it. You did a good thing, and they're undefeated right now. So yeah. For UC Davis, boy, man, they really wanted to get this win because they don't have any margin for error now. There's a lot of teams around them that are going to be vying for spots to go to Ocala, and you can't count on just winning your conference anymore. That's not going to do it if you're an ECAC team. because it looks like the bottom of the SEC and the bottom of the Big 12 are really good this year. So you've got to really, make a name for yourself. And the way you do that is by winning these non-conference meets, and they haven't done that. Also, we saw UT Martin a couple of weeks back. They didn't win their big non-conference meet either. Man, Fresno State's in the driver's seat right now to get back to Ocala, and everybody else is scrambling and hoping they'll get some help. Well, that is all of the meets to take a look at. Now, let's jump on over to the official Auburn Elvis College Equestrian rankings. Now, every week I look at a lot of factors. I mean, we're so early in the season that I can't go exclusively by the records because we still got some teams that haven't even ridden. So what do you do with them? So what I do is, in the preseason, I look at everybody's returning talent, and I try to do an educated guess off of that based on, okay, well, who's returning the most talent? Now, again, we don't know how the freshmen are going to do. We can see over at South Carolina, for example, their freshmen are doing pretty well. So it's hard to take that sort of into account, so I don't even try. What I do is I say, okay, early on, we're going to go exclusively off of returning talent. But as time goes on, and as everybody's resume starts coming into, clearer into picture, then I start transitioning away and I don't use returning talent as much. Now, we're not quite there yet because, like I said, not everybody's ridden some meets, so I don't even have resumes for everybody. But I'm doing the best I can, and so all that to say, I'm doing a combination and I'm leaning more heavily on the records because it matters. But again, we're so early. We've got some teams that, like SMU, they've only ridden on the road, so they haven't done any home meets. And we've got some teams that have done mostly home meets and not a lot of road meets. So it's not a level playing field to completely use records just yet. Okay, so I say all of that so that if I have put somebody in an order where you're like, wait a minute, they only got, this team doesn't have any losses, but this other team has a loss, what are you doing? Well, it's because of everything I just said, and I'm not going to rehash it. So just deal with it. That's what I'm getting at. Deal with it. I've got my reasons. I'm not like the NCEA that just randomly assigns these things. I have reasons. So with that, the number one team is Auburn. The Tigers made a believer out of me this weekend. They are a perfect 2-0 so far. They got a conference win on the road, and that gives them the most impressive early resume in the nation. Now, number 2 is TCU. Now, Aggies fans, hear me out on this. TCU's only loss is on the road at number 1 Auburn. But the Horned Frogs are perfect 3-0 at home against SMU, Oklahoma State, and Baylor. Plus, they also have a road win over Georgia. Now, that resume is strong. In fact, you could even argue that it's stronger than Auburn's, but again, they did lose at Auburn, so I put Auburn ahead of them. Frankly, this TCU resume is stronger than Texas A&M's. Now, that's not to say that Texas A&M isn't great. I mean, they got a perfect record so far. It's just that Texas A&M, we ain't got as much of a resume for y'all as we do for TCU. I said this last week. TCU has fewer unknowns. Texas A&M, you still got some unknowns, okay? You went on the road this weekend, but the team you faced, they're no Georgia, for example, okay? And TCU did beat Georgia at Georgia. So if you were to beat Georgia at Georgia, then I would look pretty favorably on that. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Anyway, this is just the facts, Aggies. You got to live with it. Now, number 3 is Texas A&M. The Aggies are also 2-0. They have a home win over SMU. They have a road victory over Delaware State. But the schedule is going to get a lot tougher. They got a road meet at Georgia coming up. With that, the Aggies, if you go on the road and beat Georgia, then we will talk about whether or not your resume is better than TCU's. But right now it ain't. Okay, number 4 is SMU. The Mustangs were idle this week. They are 0-2 overall, and they might soon be 0-3, maybe even 0-4. And I'll tell you, if ever there was a case that you could make that a team was better than their record, it's this SMU team. There is a legitimate chance that SMU is the best team in the nation, and they're 0-2, and they may start 0-4. Now, if they go 0-4, then you have to start wondering, okay, well, that would mean they wouldn't have gotten a win at Georgia, but other teams have, so maybe they're not the best team. But for right now, we don't know, so because they've only been on the road. It's a terrible schedule, but they're right now they're barely holding on to the number 4 spot. Number 5 is Oklahoma State. The Cowgirls were also idle. They opened with a tough conference road loss, but things may change for them when they have a trip coming to UT Martin. So we're looking forward to that for them. Number 6 is Fresno State. The 3-0 Bulldogs climbed 2 more spots in the rankings after beating UC Davis on the road there, and this was a big win for Fresno State. This is really going to help make their case to make it back to Ocala. Number 7 is Georgia. Georgia's home loss to TCU was not an impressive way to start the season by any means, but they've got a chance to show that they are still a legitimate threat with SMU coming to town. Number 8 is South Carolina. The Gamecocks are 2-0, but they took a step back this week. They lost at home by such a wide margin, and that really doesn't look good. But this season is still young, and they will have a lot of chances to show off their stuff. Number 9 is Baylor. The Bears got back into action with the road loss at TCU, but they looked much improved from last season, so they're actually going to move up a spot, even with the loss. And number 10 is UT Martin. The Skyhawks are going to climb back into my rankings after a week's absence. Their 1-1 record is not stellar, but with UC Davis losing at home, I really don't have anybody else to put in this spot. So, congratulations, Skyhawks. Okay, so now let's look at the single discipline ranking. Number 1 is still College of Charleston. Nobody has a better resume, although it did take a little bit of a hit when Lynchburg lost on the road. But I still think the Cougars are the team to beat. We're going to find out exactly how true that is in a week. But for right now, College of Charleston is still number 1. At number 2, we have Sweetbriar. The Vixens won a tough meet at Swanee this weekend, something that Lynchburg could not do. And like I said, all road wins should be celebrated, so they are definitely one of the top 2 single discipline teams in the country right now. Number 3 is Dartmouth. The Green have that lone home win over Swanee on its resume, and right now that's enough to move them up into the 3 spot in a week that they didn't even ride. So good job, Dartmouth. Number 4 is Swanee. Tigers lost to Sweetbriar, but they rebounded with that 1-point win over Lynchburg. Speaking of which, number 5 is Lynchburg. The Hornets lost at Swanee. They are now 0-2 for the first time since I've ever been covering this sport, and I just can't believe that a team with this much talent is performing the way that Lynchburg is, and yeah, they're underperforming anything we've ever seen out of Lynchburg. So, boy, don't know what's going on over there, but you're now 5th in the rankings. Number 6 is Centenary.
It's a twister! It's a twister!
They lost at Lynchburg, but they defeated Bridgewater at that neutral site. They didn't ride this week, so Swanee's upset of Lynchburg has allowed the Tigers to slide ahead of the Cyclones. And number 7 is Sacred Heart. The Pioneers continue to be idle. They're not going to ride their first meet for another week or so, another week and a half, I think. So, again, we're just going off of returning starters and points production. So, right now, yeah, Sacred Heart, you're kind of at a disadvantage because everybody else is riding and you're not. Well, everybody except for the next team, which is number 8, Barry. The Vikings aren't going to ride until November, so just like Sacred Heart, they're having to live with everybody else moving around them, and they just sit here. And our number 9 team is Bridgewater. The Eagles are 0-1, losing to Centenary at a neutral site. Next, they're going to travel to Lynchburg, and we'll see. Maybe they get the upset. Okay, that is all of our rankings. Now let's look into the future and talk about some meet previews. Our first meet to look at is a single discipline meet, Charleston at Sweetbriar. And I tell you, this is number 1 versus number 2, depending on how you want to look at it, 2 versus number 1. But either way, it is the meet of the week, folk. We saw Charleston shock the Hornets over at Lynchburg early in the season. Can they do the same to the Vixens? because again, this is at Sweetbriar. Now, the stats are going to favor Sweetbriar and their depth, plus they are the home team. But we did see them struggle over fences at Swanee. So I feel like the Cougars could win this, but I'm going to stick with my rule that when you have two comparative teams meeting up, the home team usually wins. So I'm going to predict Sweetbriar wins by 1 point. UC Davis at UT Martin. Here we have another pair of evenly matched teams, so I'm going to pick the home team again. Skyhawks by a handful of points. SMU at Georgia. This is a must-win meet for both of these teams. They're trying to establish some relevance after some disappointing starts. And just like a broken record, I'm going to go with the home team and say that Georgia wins a close one. TCU at Fresno State. Now, this meet has the potential to be very interesting. Now, this is, all right, I'm going to go against my rule here because I'm not quite sure how good Fresno State is. They're the home team, so normally I would expect the home team to win, but TCU is really loaded. I'm going to pick the Frogs by 2 points. We'll see. We'll see how it goes, but that's my prediction. I think TCU is going to win on the road over Fresno State. All right, now let's look at Oklahoma State at UT Martin. The Cowgirls should win this one, but these away meets are always tricky, so if they're not riding well, then that would open the door for the Skyhawks to get the upset. But still, I think we are going to see the Cowgirls take care of business. I think they're going to win this one by several points, say about 3 or 4. Texas A&M at Georgia. After facing SMU the day before, the home team will be doubling up on meets in the in the same weekend. You don't normally see that for the home team. It's normally the visitors that are doing the doubling up. SMU is doing that, but not A&M. A&M is coming in just to square off against Georgia. So the home team normally has an advantage because it is their horses, but Georgia is presumably going to be preparing for 2 sets of patterns unless they are using the same patterns for both meets. I don't know what the rules are on that, but if they're doing that, that would actually give them more of an advantage because they kind of get to practice with SMU, and then they get to do if the patterns are the same, they would then get to use the same patterns. So not sure if they did that. I'll keep an eye on that and see. If they did, hey, that's savvy. Good job. But if there's a rule against doing it, then shame. Don't even think about doing that. Anyway, who's going to win? Well, A&M has better stats, and Georgia did lose at home, but I'm going to give Georgia one more chance in the predictions. I'm going to say that if they've ended up beating SMU, that shows they're for real. So I'm going to go ahead and say because these are 2 close teams, Georgia again will get the win by 1 point. All right, SMU at Auburn. Now, the Mustangs have been a thorn in Auburn's side for the past 3 seasons or more, and I think this is where the Tigers are finally going to get back in the wins column against SMU. It's not going to be easy, but I think Auburn takes this one by a handful of points. And then our last meet of the week will be UC Davis versus Oklahoma State. This is going to be a neutral site meet facing off over UT Martin, probably 4-on-4. That gives a little bit of boost to the smaller school, so UC Davis will probably be able to keep it close. But overall, I think Oklahoma State has more talent, especially after what we saw with UC Davis and Fresno State this week. So I'm going to give this one to the Cowgirls. I'm going to say they win by about 2 or 3 points. Well, that's all the notes I have for this week's show. Things are going great, you know. It's the weather's turning cooler and being more pleasant outside, not as hot. So, yeah, we're now into the thick of the season, and things are going great. So, yeah, it's going to be exciting to see how this the fall season finishes up before the winter break. And I will be right here taking you through all of it. I am your host, Auburn Elvis. Thank you very much for listening, and War Horses.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.